Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we've got what is going to be the first in an ongoing series that I'm doing. It is specifically for Florida-based craft brewers. I live in Tampa, Florida, and Florida is one of the craft beer hotbeds in the country. Tends to be where there's higher populations. Florida obviously is one of the top most populous states in the country, so we are rather spoiled for choice in terms of craft brewers. And I wanted to start and hit as many really good local craft brewers as possible. Some do distribute outside of the area and will be well known by many. Some probably not as much. So I'm starting with one that maybe if you're not from Florida or anywhere near Tampa, they do distribute, but I'm not sure how far and deep into the United States. This is a local Tampa-based brewer that is in the Ybor City district of Tampa, which is a really cool part of Tampa. I love it. The name of the brewer is Coppertail Brewing, and I have been to their bar. It's a really cool bar. It's like a converted old historic building that they kind of turned into this industrial chic look. It's really neat. Really big bar. It's pet friendly. You can bring in your dog while you're sitting up at the bar and enjoying a pint. They have some games in a lounge area you can play. It's a really neat atmosphere. But their beers are awesome. So I'm starting with a couple that I've never had. So this is going to be equally fun for me. The first is going to be Supervoid. This is a pistachio imperial stout. Clocks in at 12% ABV. And then the second is Sorcha O'Sullivan, which is an IPA clocking it at 6.3% ABV. And it does state on the can that it's part of their Alpha Hunt IPA series. So I am guessing that they are using different high alpha acid content IPAs. So there's a good possibility that this could be one of the more bitter forward, hop forward IPAs, which I certainly look forward to. But nonetheless, I'm really looking forward to jumping in and supporting some of my local craft brewers. So we're going to jump in and start with the Supervoid. This is the Pistachio Imperial Stout at 12% ABV. Okay, so jumping right in with the Supervoid, the Pistachio Imperial Stout, 12% ABV on this one. They tend to have reasonably interesting label art. This one, I don't even know. It's like an alien crab looking thing crawling on, I can't even guess what it is. A giant ball, Jupiter. I don't know. You tell me. Nonetheless, that's what's on this one. And that's about the extent that I need to tell you about the label. So let's get this one cracked. And get this poured right into the glass. Very dark. Seems pretty thick. Also fairly effervescent for an Imperial. Means I ought to have a decent opportunity at forming a decent head here, but it's so effervescent it may collapse even if I get a decent one going. Yeah. All right, that's a very, very deep caramelly looking head that formed. As expected, it is pitch black. You cannot see through this beer at all. It is thick and pitch black. Let's give this a sniff. Wow, that has got a very, very strong aroma. It smells sweet and it smells slightly chocolatey, and you definitely smell the pistachio as well. And it smells like it's got a little boozy back to it, which if it comes through in the flavor, for me personally, I like that, especially in a nice high ABV beer, such as this 12% Imperial Stout. I don't think it's out of place. I actually rather appreciate it. And yeah, as anticipated, without it being on a nitro tap, that effervescent and that thick, the head's just going to go as the bubbles come up. It's just the way that it works, but that's okay. I'm going to sniff one more time. Gosh, that smells so good. I wonder if maybe this is an Imperial Milk Stout. Possibly. It does smell quite sweet, but let's jump in and find out. Mm. Oh, oh God. Oh God. That is so good. Oh man. Okay. Not that I want to out of the gate start comparing, but my immediate gut reaction is this reminds me of a big Imperial Stout by Hubbard's Cave in Niles, Illinois. They're one of the most well-known craft imperial stout masters. I think this is just as good as any I've had from Hubbard's Cave, and that is a huge, huge compliment. Bravo, Coppertail, my local hometown brewer, one of the many. Job well done here. Okay. It's not sweet per se. It kind of gives the impression of sweet without being sweet. Maybe they did add a little lactose, but if they did, it's in a sparing amount. Really, the first thing when you get it in your mouth, you do get a little slight sweetness, but you're hit by this big wallop of booze. Very booze forward, so it does have this nice boozy edge to it. From there, it opens heavily into pistachio. And I've never had pistachio in a beer, though honestly, it's a good ingredient. It should pair well with many deep roasted styles just due to the nature of the beast, and it certainly pairs well in this deep, heavy imperial stout. I'm going to jump back in, get body mouthfeel finish, and see where this flavor ride takes me. The body is not as heavy as you might think it would be, being an imperial at 12%. I'd say it's medium heavy. Mouthfeel, it's got some viscosity to it, but not crazy viscous. And it's got a nice creaminess to it, which you saw how effervescent it was. Once it starts rolling around in your palate, you can really feel that creamy nature, and due to the viscosity it does have, it feels quite lush in the mouth. And it's very wet. It's not a dry stout at all. And it really helps the flavors linger around the palate. This is pretty prototypical for big imperial stouts that aren't done dry. The way the flavor develops is that burst of sweetness up front, big punch of booze, and then immediate just mouthful of pistachio. And it pairs with that booziness, and it pairs with that slight sweetness. And then as it develops, it almost takes on this brandy-like quality. It's got a brandy-like quality to it. It's the best way I could describe it, and maybe hints of white chocolate, perhaps. It doesn't taste like chocolate roasted malt, but when all these flavors start melding and coming in and out of one another, that's what I'm getting. I'm getting booze, I'm getting sweetness, I'm getting pistachio, and I'm getting white chocolate and brandy, and it all kind of mixes. Maybe even the way it all pairs kind of on the finish here, and it's got a long finish. It tastes slightly of cherry, like not bright sweet like maraschino cherries, but like a deep, like a Bing cherry, like a fresh Bing cherry, a deeper, darker, ripe red cherry that's not overtly sweet. It's that richer cherry flavor. It's really, really good. I'm going to jump in one more time here. It's so nice. It's such a big beer. This is so big, even though it's not overtly sweet, it does have that slight sweetness to it, and it's so heavy. This is one that I would put into that kind of dessert beer category. It's just got so much presence, and it's so big and heavy. This is not a beer I think you would want to drink on a very hot day. This is one to be savored maybe after a heavy meal as a finish it off treat to yourself, or a cold winter's night curled up by the fire, and you grab a big heavy beer to warm the belly. This is really, really good. This is well done. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get to our second Coppertail beer. That's Sorcha O'Sullivan IPA at 6.3% ABV. Okay, moving on to our second beer. This is Sorcha O'Sullivan, an IPA at 6.3%. The label art on this one is really quite interesting, though the camera probably won't be able to pick up all the detail. I don't even know what it's supposed to be. It looks a bit like a twisted dream sequence or something out of a fantasy game. I honestly have no idea how best to describe it, but it looks really neat. If you could see it, it looks really neat. There's like gremlins that trapped a lady and they're drinking a case of beer. I have no idea, but that's the extent. As I stated earlier, it states on here this is part of their Alpha Hunt IPA series. So I'm assuming that that alludes to higher alpha acid content hops. And maybe they have different renditions that have different hops in them with high alpha acid. So I'm not sure what to expect, but I'm quite excited to try it. So let's get this poured straight in the glass. All right, I won't quite get the whole can in there. It's a 16-ounce can. It's a pint. This glass does not hold a pint. Okay, holding it up to the light, this is a very, very lovely IPA. It's a bright yellow with just a hint of gold, so this falls right in the textbook appearance range. It is crystal clear, a lovely looking IPA, and it's quite effervescent. It's got a mix, looks like predominantly small, and some medium bubbles, none too big. Formed a nice creamy head on top, a beautifully pillowy creamy head. And it's got a little bit of activity shoving it down, but I expect it will have pretty decent retention on this one. Looks that way at any rate. Let's give this a sniff. That smells very good. That smells very hoppy, and it smells predominantly like a mix of citrus up front, and floral behind that, and just a hint of earthy. No hint of pine or resinous, no tropical fruit. It's citrus forward, probably 70%, and probably 25% kind of floral, and then 5% earthy. Just can't pick it up in the back. That's kind of the hop aroma that comes through. Smells great. Smells very bright. Addition to that, it smells maybe like grapefruit. Grapefruit crossed with, not sure what else it is. Maybe mandarin orange, grapefruit and mandarin orange. It smells really good. It smells very bright and refreshing. That's about the extent. Head looks great, appearance looks great, and smells fantastic. Smells very fresh and bright. So let's jump in and see what this one's about. Okay. Ooh, okay. So the flavor on this, when you first get it in your mouth, it does taste quite citrusy. And you can taste some of the floral as well, but the earthy hop bitters kind of mix more flavor profile wise with the citrus side than the floral does. There's just a slight hint in the back. It's really more aroma for the floral kind of hop characteristic. Without even having looked up or researched to find out what the hop bill is in this, I can guarantee that there are mosaic hops in this beer. You can taste them. It's a very distinct flavor. It's one of the more funky hop flavors in my opinion. Mosaic hops are funky. They impart on the aroma typically a relatively pronounced kind of blueberry aroma, though funny enough, I can't smell blueberry in this at all. I don't pick up any of that, but it comes through in the flavor. Mosaic has a very distinct, it's kind of a funky, it's a funky flavor. Not Brettanomyces funk, but hop funk. You would know it if you tasted it. If you've had any single hop Mosaic beers or any IPAs that have Mosaic as like the main, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's got a very distinct flavor to it and aroma. It's a very unique hop strain, and it does indeed have a higher alpha acid content. That said, let's talk about the bitters. I'm going to have another sip. I could get them up front. I wouldn't say it's overtly bitter. It's not pungent bitter, but it's probably a little more bitter than the average IPA. So I'm going to jump back in. Get a nice punch up front. What tastes like Mosaic hops really comes through quite strongly up front. And it really mixes with this kind of mandarin orange and grapefruit. The same kind of thing I got on the aroma. It comes through in the flavor of the beer. It's very crisp. It's very refreshing. Yes, it's got a nice bitter edge to it. It is hop forward, but it's also balanced. It doesn't overwhelm you to the point that it feels heavy or like, you know, the intensity of a really deep, rich, roasted pitch black coffee, but in beer form. It's not quite that oppressive. It's balanced. It is very, very well balanced. I'm going to jump back in for body and mouthfeel and explore fully how this finish develops. The body is medium. The mouthfeel is very creamy. Everything I described with the opening flavors is 100% accurate. And all of them meld together, and it kind of peaks in intensity of flavor within about 4 to 5 seconds. And it actually kind of plateaus and maintains that intensity for about another 5 seconds before it starts its downward trajectory. It's not a straight line down. It's a longer sweeping curve, so it's kind of a skewed bell distribution. Starts up kind of like a normal bell curve, then when it hits the apex, it goes straight across a plateau. It's got a very long tail off to the side. I know that's getting out of frame on the camera. I can see it on my viewfinder, but it's very long. This has quite a long finish. The hops really stick around the palate, and you can continue tasting the bitters. What tastes to me like mosaic hops really sticks around. That's the most prominent flavor that I'm tasting. It's kind of a funky, intense hop, and it's a medium intensity bitter, maybe a medium high. It's not super ridiculous high end. We're not talking Magnum cryo extraction or anything. It's like a standard decent amount of mosaic. And mosaic hops do have a fairly high alpha acid. I think on average they're between 10 to 12, which is pretty high up there. There are certainly others that are higher, but that's a pretty good alpha acid content. And it does help to bitter the beer. It adds a ton of aroma and a ton of very unique flavor. And I'll tell you, as I'm sitting here, I can still taste this finish. It kind of, the way that the hops mix with the citrus notes to it, it ends up kind of tasting like lemongrass, because lemongrass, it smells of lemon and it tastes lemony, but there's an underlying bitterness to lemongrass, and kind of that funk that I'm getting from the hop really mix and puts me in mind of lemongrass. And it's a very refreshing flavor, the way that it all blends together. This would be an IPA, albeit a bit on the intense side, that I do think would still work under my category of great hot summer day beers. I still think, because this is so light and fresh and crisp, that it does still very much feel like a refreshing IPA to me. It's very nice. It's very well executed, and it's very well balanced. I'm going to have one more sip for final thoughts here. Yeah, the balance on this beer is absolutely fantastic. They really, really nailed it. The malt bill that's in here, you really only get a sense of it at the very front when you first get it in your mouth. You can get a little bit of that malty edge, and then the brightness and the citrus nature and the hops and the bitters and the funk, they just come into the forefront and blow it away. So this is one of those prototypical IPAs, the kind that I really appreciate the most, to be perfectly honest, that is very, very hop dominant. This is a IPA that I think any hophead would enjoy, and I think it would work well as a hot summer day refreshing beer. If you're on the fence between the really intense IPAs and kind of middle of the road, this might be one to explore. It's not ridiculously intense. I'll bring back my old couple favorite examples I haven't used in a while. It's not to the level of a Stone Ruination IPA in hop intensity, and it's not to the level of a Sierra Nevada Torpedo Extra IPA. It's not quite that in your face, but it is more hop dominant and bitter dominant than your average IPA, to be certain. This is a very, very good beer. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to take my time sipping on this, calling up my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both of these beers, we're going to go through and get them ranked. Starting with the Supervoid, this is a pistachio flavored imperial stout. Clocks in at 12% ABV. Again, Coppertail is based here in my local city of Tampa, Florida. Starting with the aroma on this was quite pronounced, certainly well above average, but not quite as pungent as some of the top most aromatic imperial stouts. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the taste, I really, really enjoyed the flavor on this, and honestly, I've never had a beer that's been brewed with pistachio, and I gotta say, particularly in an imperial stout form, it pairs exceptionally well. Just the natural flavor of the nut pairs with the malts and kind of the big, bold booziness of it, and it really, really works in this beer style. Really, about the only thing I could say about the flavor is, even though I like a higher ABV beer to have a boozy character, I don't consider that a fault. It was just a little overbearing on this one, so I did dock 1 point. I gave it a 9 for the taste. Body. The body was certainly large. It's an imperial stout, but at 12%, this is quite a high ABV. And honestly, I did expect the body to be quite a bit larger and more substantive than it actually was. I did dock some points there. I gave it a 7, just above average. For the mouthfeel, very, very nice mouthfeel. It was typically creamy. It wasn't quite silky, and you could feel some of the effervescence. This was actually a pretty highly carbonated imperial stout, which some are, some aren't, but in imperials it's a little less common, and that kind of took away from some of that creaminess and kind of kept it from being silky. It was just a little too active. I gave it a 9 out of 10. For the finish, this was a very, very, very long finish. It just kept going and going and going, and the way that it developed kind of introduced you to all of the various aspects of the flavors that would come through, and there was just a ton of interplay until it peaked, and there was a nice even tail off to the end, and it stayed very, very consistent and very, very long. It gets a 10 out of 10. Head and retention on this one. It was okay. That's about all I can say. It formed and it just broke away and didn't retain very much at all. I said it was just average. I gave it a 5. Appearance-wise, this was a textbook imperial stout. It was absolutely pitch black. Could not see light through it. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance, this comes back to what I mentioned with the taste. I did really enjoy it, but the booziness was actually even a bit overbearing for me, and I like that. Also, the pistachio, I know that was a main flavoring agent, but it was really, really pungent to the point where actually tasting the base malts in the imperial stout, which are part of the things I like about them, it's high concentrated, deep roasted malt, it really kind of drowned that out, so you couldn't pick them up at all. So taking those two into consideration, I did dock points, and I gave it a 7 for the balance. Feeling in the intangible. I really, really, really enjoyed this beer. I mentioned as I was sampling it that I think overall this is as good as any Hubbard's Cave Imperial Stout offering that I've had. It reminded me a lot of their beers. Big, bold, in your face, exceedingly flavorful, and really kind of what I would term a dessert beer. It's so heavy and bold. Really, there's a lot of likenesses between this one and a Hubbard's and some other very reputable Imperial Stout brewers, but there were a few little nitpicks I had with this beer that kept it from reaching upper echelon for me. I gave it an 8 though, well above average. Finally, as an example of the style, I gave the exact same score I did for my personal subjective feeling. Objectively, this is a good beer, but there are a few little aspects of it that just weren't quite right, and I did have to dock some points, so it does get the 8. That brings the total score on Coppertail's Supervoid Pistachio Imperial Stout to an 82 out of 100. So this is certainly well above average, and if you're into Imperial Stouts, this is one I do recommend. If you're lucky enough to have the beer in your local market, I'm not sure how far the distributor for Coppertail reaches. I know you can get it in most places in Florida, but I don't know if they get out of the state or even into other states in the Southeast. But if you find this one, it's well worth trying. Very enjoyable beer. Moving on to number 2, the Sorcha O'Sullivan. This is their IPA, part of their Alpha Hunt IPA series. This clocked in at 6.3% ABV. The aroma on this one was nice. It was certainly above average, but it didn't have quite as pronounced of hop aroma as one would anticipate. You could smell it, and they were there. It just wasn't overly pungent. I give it above average. I gave it a 7. For the taste. The taste on this, since it says it's part of the Alpha Hunt series, I did actually expect that it would have a lot larger amount of high alpha acid hops to really bring in the hop aroma and flavor and the bitter profile. and it was good, but it wasn't overt. I was kind of expecting kind of along the range of a typical West Coast style that's big, bold, in your face, and this was a little more tame than that. I still really enjoyed it. I gave it above average. I gave it a 7. For the body on this, as a 6.3% ABV IPA, it definitely has some fermentables in there. It's kind of sitting middle of the road in IPA territory, kind of standard. It's not nearing on imperial and certainly not down in the session. It's kind of right in the middle. I did expect the body, though, for it to be right in the middle, to have more substance than it did. It really kind of fell flat in that regard. It didn't have that much of a robust feel in the mouth. It was maybe a little bit heavier than, say, water or juice in the mouth, but not by much. The fermentables didn't add that much in terms of the body relative to what I was expecting. Yeah, I gave it the high end of average. I gave it a 6. For the mouthfeel. Now, the mouthfeel on this was textbook. This easily could have come straight off of a draft. It was just as creamy and rich and just wonderful, silky, smooth mouthfeel. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the finish, this had a very long finish, despite the fact that it wasn't overtly pungent in terms of hops and hop presence and bitters. The balance of it was just such that it kind of extended out, and the malt kind of extended out, and all the various hop flavors extended out in tandem with the bitters, and it really kept going for a very long time. It was equally as long as the finish on the stout. I give it a 10 out of 10. Head and retention. The head and retention on this was absolute perfection. Again, this looked like it could have been poured off a tap at a bar, which really kind of matched the mouthfeel. They go a lot in tandem. If the head forms really silky, creamy, pillowy, it probably means that the carbonation is super fine, relatively active, but not over, and it adds to that creamy texture when it starts rolling around in the palate. Perfect head, gets a 10 out of 10. Appearance-wise, this was essentially the color that I think of in my mind when I think of an IPA. It may have been a slightly lighter, slightly less orangey hue than the average, but it was certainly well in the standard range of color for an IPA. I gave it a perfect 10 out of 10. Balance on this. Exceptionally well-balanced beer. I got to pick out all of the different hops that brought aroma to the table in the aroma. I got to pick out all of the changes in the hop flavor profile in the taste, and also got to taste that really nice classic IPA malt backbone, and it all just paired evenly. I could pick everything out individually. Nothing really overshadowed anything else. It was masterfully balanced. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible. I really, really enjoyed this beer. I did. It's 6.3. It's middle of the road for an IPA, so they kind of run the gamut. But as I was thinking, and I said, you know, how many IPAs I've had kind of in that middle of the road. They're not going overboard. They're not going underboard. They're just kind of sitting in the middle of the range. I thought this was an excellent, excellent rendition from that kind of middle tier IPA ABV territory. It doesn't have a boatload of malt, so it's not boosting it up. It's letting the hops shine, and I could still taste everything in there. I really enjoyed it. I thought they did a great job. I gave it a 9 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, this was a really good IPA. I really, really enjoyed it, and there were really only a couple things about it that kept me from pushing it up in points to get to that top tier category. It was really the body. If it had had just a bit more breadth to the body, that would have helped the cause, and also the taste and the aroma. The aroma could have been more pungent. I already mentioned that. The taste, it was really good, but Alpha Hunt series, I did expect it to be more bitter forward, more hop forward, and it didn't quite deliver there. Perhaps I was getting my own hopes up, but that is what I was anticipating, and I didn't quite get it. I gave it an 8 as an example of this style. That brings the total score on Sorcha O'Sullivan to an 87 out of 100. So all total, only a 5-point spread between these beers. Completely different offerings for completely different beer lovers. And I really, really wanted to jump in and do some local Florida craft beer series where I hit as many of the top tier, most respected local Florida craft breweries, and wanted to start with one here in my own backyard, Tampa-based Coppertail Brewing. I absolutely love this brewer. I'm always on the hunt for new beers that they release, and they release a lot constantly. Some you can only get in their tap room, which is a very quick drive for me, not 10 minutes down the road, so I'm fortunate in that respect, but absolutely loved it. Really enjoyed this review. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, I sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Likes certainly help the channel, helps others find us. Subscribe will keep our videos in your feed, and if you ever lose them, you can just click on your subscriptions and jump straight to the channel for any content you may have missed. And comments, I definitely want to hear from you. I want to know your thoughts, opinions, feelings, suggestions, questions, anything you want to throw at me, throw it in the comments. I will reply until it gets loaded to the point that I can't. If you want to keep in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, just click the little notification bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Till next time, folks, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.